Hey guys, my name is Matumio, and today I wanted to confess my addiction to the game Insurgency. I've been playing this way too often over the last couple of weeks, and during my playtime, I've noticed that this indie game accomplishes and succeeds with some mechanics that AAA titles like Battlefield and Call of Duty attempt to try to achieve, but fall short, and Insurgency passes with flying colors. And so for today, I wanted to explain what these mechanics are, or what I enjoy and appreciate about Insurgency, and what I think the developers are doing right. It's not a flawless game by any means. There are plenty of problems with Insurgency, but there are some amazing aspects of this game that I think large AAA titles like DICE and like the Call of Duty franchise could learn something from these developers. And so the first thing is the suppression effect. As many of you are aware, suppression has been a very hot topic amongst the Battlefield community. Some people love it, some people hate it, some people think that it adds a further layer into the franchise, because if you see a sniper that's way off in the distance, if you're using a light machine gun or, not a sniper rifle to compete with him, you can put some bullets down range, cause some suppression effect, and then it's going to be much more difficult for him to line up a shot against you. He's going to have to deal with weapon sway if he's playing in Battlefield, and he's going to have to deal with bullet deviation if it was all the way back in Battlefield 3. Some people love this mechanic. The thing about it, though, is that when someone is shooting at a corner where you're about to peek out at, you never have the fear of God in you. Like, you know that you're going to be suppressed, and you can peek out, maybe take a couple of shots down range, and you might have to deal with a little bit of the suppression effect, but for the most part, you're not terrified that you're going to die if you peek your head out. And that's what the suppression effect is trying to accomplish, or I'm assuming that's what it's trying to accomplish, but it sort of falls short in the Battlefield franchise. That is not the case in Insurgency. They still have a little bit of weapon sway if you are fully suppressed, but because of the way that the game works, and I realize I'm about to compare apples and oranges from Battlefield to Insurgency, the games are vastly different. But the thing about Insurgency is that because you die very quickly in that game, and it's more realistic, there isn't a mini-map where you can figure out the exact location of an enemy, as soon as you start to get shot at, you freak out. Like, you actually freak out as a person. Your soldier is screaming bloody murder, he's freaking out as well. And when you're fully suppressed, or you know that someone has a bead on you and they're shooting at you, you duck for cover. Not because you're gonna have to deal with more bullet deviation or more weapon sway. You duck for cover because you don't want to die. Like that's actually what suppression is supposed to accomplish. It's supposed to make it so that someone doesn't want to peek their head out, peek out of a corner or over a ledge of a window, and that is exactly what Insurgency accomplishes. And once again, I do realize that this is comparing apples and oranges, because in Battlefield, you don't die immediately, and you're never going to be able to instill that type of fear into a player. You're never going to have the fear of God, instilled into these players. But in Insurgency, it is so much fun to not only use the mechanic, because if you know someone is out there, if you just fire a bunch of bullets over their head, they're not going to peek that, or it's going to be at least a while before they peek that round. And you can use it, in my opinion, a hell of a lot more tactically in that game, just simply because suppression makes a lot more sense in Insurgency. Another thing I really enjoy about this title is that the developers are constantly bringing new content. There's been new maps, there's been new weapons. I know that they just added in the grenade launcher, which is really fun, devastating if you're able to get a nice flank off and launch this into a room. And the real kicker on all of this is that it's 100% free. These developers, and actually I would say a lot of indie developers out there now, remind me a hell of a lot like what DICE was back in the day when they were creating the Bad Company series. I know that many of you may not remember this because a lot of you may have jumped into Battlefield with Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4, but when they were creating Bad Company 2, they were constantly bringing us free and new content. They were expanding upon maps, they were giving us brand new maps that we never played upon, different game modes for the maps that they already had established, and it was awesome. It was just a nice little treat every once in a while. It kept the community going, it kept Bad Company on the map, it kept people playing the game, and I remember distinctly that a DICE employee came out and said that we are never going to charge for map packs. They did charge for the Vietnam expansion pack, but that felt like it was okay because it felt like its own unique game. The Vietnam expansion pack was one of the best expansion packs I think that's ever been created. It was amazing. But they said, I distinctly remember them saying that they were never going to charge for map packs, essentially. As you guys know, that policy has changed dramatically. I mean, we have the premium services, we have all this DLC content that now arrives, and it costs $15, at least at day one. And maybe it's because of EA's influence, maybe it's just because DICE realized that there's a lot of money to be made with this. Like, I'm sure they're making truckloads of cash. But going back and remembering what it was all about with Bad Company 2 and seeing where it's gone today, you know, it's slightly disappointing. I realize it's a business, I realize that they are in it for the money, they are in it to create great games for us, but also just to make some cash on their end. But to be playing Insurgency, where they haven't been charging anything for their content, it is just a nice breath of fresh air. Another thing I love about Insurgency are the small, minute details that they've added into the game. You may not even notice these small little features for the first couple of hours, but once you start to get the hang of things, once you start to play the game for a long time, you realize that these small, minute details actually impact the way you perform, and if you use them correctly, can influence if you're going to win a firefight or how successful you are in this game. The best example of that I can think of are the gun sounds. Battlefield, Call of Duty, yes, all of the guns sound slightly different. You know, this isn't something brand new. This isn't revolutionary to Insurgency by any means. But because there are two different factions, you can play as the US faction or you can play as the Insurgency, they are going to be using different classes of weapons. If you're playing as the Insurgency, many of you are going to be using the AKs, and the AKs sound distinct. They sound differently compared to what the US soldiers are using, which is more in line with like M16s. You got like the M16A4, I think there's also the M16A3. You're using, you know, completely different weapons compared to the Insurgency faction. And once you start to play the game for a long time, you start to notice the distinctions and the differences between the weapon sounds, and there were some moments where I was like, okay, I actually know that that is an enemy off to my left and not a teammate, simply because of the way that the gun sounds. I was blown away by this the first time I realized that this was a feature in the game. And while I know that this is basically the fact in other first-person shooters out there, Battlefield, Call of Duty, PlanetSide, all first-person shooters have different sounding guns in the game, because if it didn't, that would lessen the experience. Like, let's be honest, if every single gun sounded the same, that would suck. But because of the way that they set up the two different factions, and each faction has different classes of weapons, eventually, slowly, you start to realize and understand the distinctions between them, and then you can take advantage of that information. It's amazing. Like, it is such a cool aspect about Insurgency. And then the best aspect about this is that this is just one of the small details in an ocean of little minute details that accumulate and just enhance the game. You may have noticed that every time I fire my weapon, there's smoke that comes out of it. It looks awesome. It looks amazing. I wish more first-person shooters would do this. Because you don't have a minimap system, you have to rely on more of weapon sounds like we already discussed, but you also have to watch out for tracer bullets. You have to watch out for where your teammates are dying. That information gives you some clues as to where the enemy is shooting you from. All of these small little details accumulate into a package that actually gives you a nice picture of what is going on in the battlefield. And while other first-person shooters, other video games accomplish this by giving you like a mini-map and having a spotting system like in Battlefield, you don't necessarily need that Insurgency because of the small little details that they give you along the way. But yeah, I just wanted to nerd out about this game and talk about the features that I have been loving over the last couple of weeks, and honestly, what large AAA titles could take some notes on. Like Insurgency, for being just an indie developer, what they do very, very well. And I have to give a tip of my hat to the developers, because they have done a phenomenal job with their $15 game. But yeah, guys, until tomorrow, have a good one and take it easy.